Jericho was buzzing. Crowds filled the streets, pushing and shoving, eager to see the man who performed miracles and spoke with divine authority. But in the midst of the chaos, one man stood alone. Zacchaeus. Not because he wanted to, but because no one wanted to be near him. A tax collector, a traitor in the eyes of his people. He had wealth, power, and status, but something was missing, something money could never buy. And when he heard that Jesus was coming, something inside him stirred. A longing, a curiosity, a hope he couldn't explain. But there was a problem. The crowd was too big, and he was too small. He had two choices: give up or find another way. So he ran. He climbed. A grown man, a wealthy man, humiliating himself just to catch a glimpse of Jesus. What he didn't know was that Jesus was already looking for him. In the next few minutes, we will uncover how Zacchaeus went from an outcast to a transformed man and what his story means for you today. Because whether you know it or not, Jesus is looking for you too. Chapter 1, The Despised Sinner. Who was Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus was not a man people admired. He was a chief tax collector, which meant two things: he was extremely wealthy, and he was deeply hated. In the eyes of the Jewish people, he was more than just a corrupt man, he was a traitor, a sellout working for the Roman oppressors. Luke 19 verse 2 tells us, there was a man named Zacchaeus, he was a chief tax collector and was rich. But beneath his wealth, Zacchaeus carried something no one saw: emptiness. He had climbed the social ladder, but he had lost himself along the way. The respect of his people? Gone. A sense of belonging? Gone. He had everything except the one thing that mattered. And maybe that's where you are today. Maybe, like Zacchaeus, you've chased after things the world says will fulfill you: money, success, influence, only to find yourself more lost than ever. Zacchaeus had everything, but peace was not one of them. Yet something made him desperate enough to seek Jesus. And this is where his story takes a turn. What would make a powerful, wealthy man run through a crowd and climb a tree like a child? What was he really looking for? Let's find out in the next chapter. Chapter 2, The Curious Search, Climbing the Tree. Zacchaeus had spent years building a life of luxury, yet none of it satisfied him. And when he heard that Jesus was coming through Jericho, something inside him refused to stay still. He needed to see this man, this teacher who spoke with authority, who dined with sinners, who healed the broken. But how? The crowd was thick, pressing in on every side. And Zacchaeus? He was too small to see over the people blocking his view. He could have turned away, convinced himself it wasn't worth the effort. But something greater pulled him forward. Instead of accepting defeat, Zacchaeus did something unexpected. He ran ahead of the crowd, an undignified act for a man of his wealth and position. And then, he did something even more shocking: he climbed a tree. Picture this: a wealthy, powerful man scrambling up a sycamore tree like a child. The same man who once sat behind a tax collector's table, demanding money from the poor, was now perched among the branches, desperate for just one glimpse of Jesus. What drove him to such an act? Desperation. Hope. A hunger for something more than what he had known. And maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you've tried to find fulfillment in all the wrong places, but deep inside, there's still a longing, still a whisper that says, there must be something more. Zacchaeus thought he was just trying to see Jesus. What he didn't realize was that Jesus had already seen him. Because in the very next moment, something happens that no one expected. Let's move to the next chapter and witness the moment that changed everything. Chapter 3, The Call of Jesus. Come down, Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus thought he was invisible. Hidden among the branches, he assumed he could observe Jesus from a distance, unnoticed and anonymous. But then, something unimaginable happened. Jesus stopped. He looked up. Right at Zacchaeus. And then he called him by name: Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Luke 19 verse 5. Can you imagine the shock? The gasps from the crowd? Of all the people in Jericho, Jesus chose the most despised man to acknowledge, to call, to visit. This moment is powerful for one reason: Jesus saw him before Zacchaeus even saw himself. He didn't just see a tax collector. He didn't see a sinner to condemn. He saw a man in need of grace, of love, of transformation. And instead of ignoring him, Jesus invited himself into Zacchaeus' life. Not after he changed. Not after he cleaned himself up. But right there, in the midst of his brokenness. This is what Jesus does. He calls us as we are, not as we think we should be. He doesn't wait for us to fix ourselves before approaching us. He simply says, "Come down. Let me in." And Zacchaeus? He didn't hesitate. Luke 19 verse 6 tells us, "So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly." For the first time in a long time, Zacchaeus felt seen, known, and valued. But what happens next is even more incredible. Because when Jesus enters a life, transformation follows. Let's move to the next chapter and witness Zacchaeus' radical change. Chapter 4, Radical Transformation, from false wealth to true riches. The moment Zacchaeus climbed down from that tree, his life was no longer the same. The weight of years of corruption, greed, and loneliness began to lift. For the first time, he wasn't just seen, he was chosen. And not just by anyone, but by Jesus himself. The very people who despised him watched in disbelief as Jesus, the holy teacher, entered the house of a man they considered unworthy. "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner," they murmured, Luke 19 verse 7. But while the crowd grumbled, something extraordinary was happening inside Zacchaeus' heart. He had spent his whole life accumulating wealth, but in one encounter, he realized what true riches were. And he didn't just feel remorse, he acted. "Look, Lord. Here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Luke 19 verse 8. This wasn't just words. It was proof of real transformation. The man who once took from others now gave freely. The heart that once hoarded now overflowed with generosity. What changed? Zacchaeus had met Jesus, and when you truly meet Jesus, you don't stay the same. His past no longer defined him. His reputation, his mistakes, his sins, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was his response to grace. And Jesus confirmed this transformation with a declaration that silenced every critic in the crowd. "Today salvation has come to this house." Luke 19 verse 9. But here's the question: what about you? Zacchaeus didn't let his past keep him from stepping into his future. He didn't let fear stop him from embracing grace. And now, you stand at a similar crossroads. Because what happens next is not just about Zacchaeus, it's about you. It's about the invitation that Jesus extends to you today. Are you ready to receive it? In the next chapter, we will uncover what this story means for your own journey. Because Jesus didn't just come for Zacchaeus, he came for all of us. And right now, he is calling your name. Chapter 5, The Legacy of Zacchaeus, Seek and Be Transformed. Zacchaeus' story is not just a historical account, it is a mirror reflecting our own spiritual journey. His transformation is a testimony of what happens when a person truly encounters Jesus. But the question remains, what does this story mean for you today? Seeking Jesus requires action. Zacchaeus didn't wait for the perfect moment, he ran, climbed, and positioned himself where he could see Jesus. And in doing so, Jesus found him. Sometimes, faith requires us to step beyond our comfort zones, to seek Christ with urgency and determination. Are you actively seeking him in your life? Jesus sees you before you see him. Long before Zacchaeus ever climbed that tree, Jesus knew his name. He knew his struggles, his sins, and his desire for something more. And despite everything, Jesus called him down with love. No matter where you are in life, Jesus sees you too, and he is calling your name today. True wealth is found in Christ. Zacchaeus entered that day as a man full of riches but empty in spirit. By the end of his encounter with Jesus, he had given away his wealth, but gained something far greater: salvation, joy, and eternal purpose. The world defines success by money, power, and status, but Jesus redefines it through love, generosity, and transformation. Salvation is for everyone. Zacchaeus was an outcast, a man many believed was beyond redemption. But Jesus said in Luke 19 verse 10, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." If Jesus pursued Zacchaeus, he will pursue you. No sin, no failure, no past mistake is too great for his grace. This is where Zacchaeus' story and your story intersect. He had to make a choice, to come down from that tree, to let Jesus into his life, and to respond with action. And now, the choice is yours. Will you come down and let Jesus transform you? Let us know in the comments, what part of Zacchaeus' story speaks to you the most? If this message touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself, share it, like it, and subscribe so more people can hear about the life-changing power of Jesus. Zacchaeus climbed a tree and came down a changed man. Now, it's your turn to take that step of faith. Jesus is waiting.